Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. I am BeardedDev. In this video it's going to be a SQL tutorial and we're going to be looking at the pivot statement. So pivot allows us to rotate data from rows to columns. That can be ideal for reporting, which will become apparent when we go through an example shortly, and it makes it easier to analyse data. And we're also moving into the side of being able to visualising trends as well. So first of all, we're going to have a look at the pivot syntax. So it starts off with a source query. So we'll select our underlying query that we're going to be using for the pivot syntax. Then we're going to be pivoting based on an aggregate function. And then we're going to be using spreading columns and spreading elements, which will become apparent when we go through the example. And then finally we do a select from there. So the pivot clause is part of the table statement, so it goes after the from clause. So let's jump over to SQL Server Management Studio now and we'll go through some examples. Now I've got a table here and I'm just selecting a few columns. So all I've got here is a customer ID, a date and an amount that the sale value was for. Now what we want to achieve is identifying sales by customer per month. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to identify the month name to make this data more readable to users, and how we're going to do that is just simply use the DATENAME built-in SQL function. So I'm just going to drop that onto here and I'm just going to alias this column as month. So I'll go ahead and update that query now, so we can see in our results grid we've got the month name, so it's been replaced with January, February or March. It's worth pointing out we're only looking at Q1 sales data for 2018 at the moment in this table. Now, like I said previously, we want to identify sales by customer per month. So one way we could do that is simply by using a group by clause. So if we group by sales customer ID, and also we'll have to use the function within the group by statement. So I'll just drop that in there as well. And then we'll just sum the sales amount and we'll just alias that as total. So if I go ahead and execute that query now that does give us the results we want, but if we was to output that on screen or send that to some executives within the business to say this is what's happening at the moment, it's not very readable. Obviously we'll usually have a reporting tool that this would feed into that would allow us to transform the data, but we're talking specifically about working within SQL itself today. So the downside of the group by statement is if we had a lot of different rows in here, we'd have to scroll down. We can't really see what's going on for each customer. So that's where pivoting allows us to see into the data more. I've just brought up a new query window which shows the details of what the pivot statement looks like. So as discussed previously, we're going to be looking at a source query, and in this case we have put some grouping on this that I'm just going to remove for now, and we'll take that over to our other query window and drop that into our source query. So we're going to be selecting our sales customer ID with our date name as a month and then the sales amount. So this is where we're looking at now, is within our pivot window. So I'll just make this look a bit clearer. So our aggregate function is going to be sum, and that's going to be on our sales amount column. Now our spreading column is going to be the month. We're looking at this data by month in this particular query, so we'll change that to sum sales amount for month, and then our spreading elements are going to be our new column names. And in this case it's going to be, like I said before, we're only looking at Q1 for 2018, so we've only got 3 months worth of data in this actual table. So I'm just going to write out our month's name. So that is our pivot syntax. So we're going to be summing on sales amount for month in January, February and March. And then what we can do is go ahead and select our columns from this query. So we're going to be looking at, I'll just space this out so it's a bit clearer, our sales customer ID. And now we're going to be looking at our new columns of January, February and March. And also what we need to add to these queries is just a table name. So I'm just going to alias this subquery as source and then our pivot table as PVT as well. So we've got there our select statement at the top, but really you want to start with the underlying query, which I've just highlighted, your source table in this case. Then we do our pivoting, so it's the keyword pivot after we've aliased our source query. Open brackets, our aggregate function, which is sum in this case, our aggregate column, which is going to be sales amount, so we're going to be summing the sales amount. The spreading column, which is going to be month, and then the spreading elements, which are effectively our new column names, January, February and March. So if I go ahead and execute that query now, and we can see in our results grid, we've got our sales customer ID, January, February and March, as column names. So visually it's a lot easier for us to see what's happening with each individual customer. For example, straight away we can see our customer ID 1, they spent £357 in January and since then it has decreased. But if we look at sales customer ID 8, they only spent £87 roughly in January, and each month that seems to be increasing. So in terms of that customer, we seem to be going the right way. So this is how I explained earlier that we could see our we can easily visualize this data rather than just having the data in rows themselves. Now what we can also do is, I don't have any data within this query for April, but we could also add that on as one of our new columns to see what happens. So we just need to add it into the spreading elements and then select it as our final part of our select. And if we go ahead and execute that, because we haven't got any data, that would just be represented by null. So the pivot query automatically does that for us. We could also just comment that out. So it's still pivoting by it, but it's not part of the final select statement. What we'll do last of all is just go through another example and we'll switch this round. So we'll use our sales customer ID to be effectively transposed into columns, and then we'll leave our month values within the original column. So again, I'll start with the source query. I'll just open up a new query window. I'll just set this so it's readable, and we'll go ahead and have a look at that data. So I always like to start with the underlying source query, and then from there I'm going to drop that into effectively a subquery. So I'm just going to surround that by brackets, and I'm just going to give that an alias as src, which is just short for source. Obviously you can call that anything that you'd like to do. Now the way I write it, you will get some red squiggly lines to say your syntax is incorrect, but we haven't actually finished the query yet. So again, we're going to be using sum. You can use any aggregate function here that you wish, count, max, min, and that's completely up to yourself and what you're trying to achieve. But for the purpose of the examples we're going through, we're just going to go through some sales amount again, and that's going to be 4. And now our spreading attribute is going to be our sales customer ID. So in the previous example it was for month, but now we're going to be looking at customer ID, and our new column values are going to be 1. I'll just quickly go ahead and write these out. So I've just written all of those new column names out, our spreading elements. We'll just alias that as PVT, and then we'll go ahead and write our final select statement. So it's going to be month, and then each of our new column names. I'll just copy out these and then change the values. So I've done that now, and just simply add a from. I'll just hide the results grid. So if I go ahead and write that out, as you can see there, I had a bit of a problem with IntelliSense. IntelliSense is great until it tries to presume that you're writing something else. So that's our full query now. So we're now spreading by sales customer ID, and then our list of values of sales customer ID. As you can see, we have to write all of those out, and then they're part of our final select statements. So if we go ahead and execute that query now, we now get our month, and then our sales customer ID is now in column format. So I hope you've seen the benefit of pivot statements and how they're beneficial compared to group by, particularly if we was going to drop this into a report. It allows end users to quickly see what's going on with the data, rather than just in effectively a list in row format, and they have to scroll, they have to put it into Excel to manipulate it themselves. It saves the users from having to go through that. So one last final look at the syntax there. So we have our aggregate function, our aggregate column. We have our spreading element here, which is the values we want to change to a column format, and then we have, that's our spreading attribute, and then we have our new column names, and again they are in our original select statement from this query as well. So I hope you have enjoyed that video, guys. Just a quick insight to pivots. We will be doing a lot more videos on the channel as well. If you haven't already, do check out my other videos and subscribe to the channel. There's lots of good content on there on data development and data analysis and business intelligence as well. Click that notification button as well to be made aware of when videos are uploaded, and feel free to share the video. Thanks a lot for watching.